I knew something was off the moment Brad called me Sunshine in the middle of our Monday stand-up. That man had the emotional range of a dry mop, and if he was smiling, it meant someone else was about to get burned. My name's not Sunshine. It's the woman who kept your fragile server infrastructure from collapsing every time someone sneezed near the GPU farm. 42, Systems Integration Specialist, and apparently, Department's token female perspective, as if estrogen somehow made the racks run cooler. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud, but I was precise, methodical, and apparently, according to Brad and his beer pong Nepo baby of a nephew, that made me too academic. I'd been working on a redesign for 6 months. Modular, high-efficiency racks that could withstand the violent pressure fluctuations of upper atmosphere testing. If you breathed on it wrong, the old system buckled like a Walmart tent in a wind tunnel. Mine didn't. Mine held. And somewhere deep in the guts of the company's aerospace pipeline, a quiet audit had already flagged my system as promising. Only a handful of us knew that me, the external contractor I briefed once, and maybe Brad, if he'd been snooping, which, knowing Brad, meant definitely. But of course, none of that mattered out loud. Out loud, I was just the quiet one with the clipboard, one who triple-checked torque specs and didn't laugh at his fart jokes. The one who dared to ask in front of the execs why we were still using aluminum frames when the titanium-laced hybrids had passed thermal testing 3 months ago. Too slow, he muttered. We need movers, not thinkers. So I thought, and I built. And late at night, when everyone else was gone, I'd log my badge access, slide into my corner terminal, and compile every modification into both local backups and encrypted remote snapshots. Not paranoia, just experience. Because the last guy who built something game-changing, Brad took the credit, gave him a plaque, and showed him the door 2 months later. Speaking of plaques, you ever notice how 97% of people who listen to these stories don't subscribe? Which means I'm out here spilling federal-grade tea while Brad's nephew is probably still calling HDMI ports the skinny usps, and y'all are just lurking like it's a free Costco sample. Hit that subscribe. It keeps us fueled, caffeinated, and just petty enough to keep telling the truth. Back to the racks. See, there's an art to server design. Not just the thermals and the airflow, though those mattered, but the way the cables lay. Serviceability without breaking your wrist in a 2U chassis, the hot swap modularity. I obsessed over it. I sketched by hand, ran simulations, cross-tested load capacities on lunch breaks while Brad argued about barbecue ribs in the break room like a man who thought meat sauce was a leadership style. And when I knew it worked, when I felt it, I printed a copy of the final schematic, signed it in ink, and locked it in my bottom drawer. Just one. Just in case, that drawer had a sticky note on the inside lip that read, in case of Brad. No one ever saw it but me. The week everything changed started just like this. A department-wide email from audit flagged all ongoing projects for efficiency review. Most of the guys groaned. I didn't. I knew mine would sing. Quietly, efficiently, confidently. I had no idea that folder was about to become a target, but Brad did. The audit results hit our inboxes like a polite earthquake. HR phrased it as a routine review of workflow efficiencies, but everyone knew it was a blood test for dead weight. I wasn't worried. My numbers were tight, my timeline tighter, and I'd already stress-tested the rack design against every simulated scenario short of a moonquake. Still, I kept quiet while Brad barked about bureaucratic navel-gazing and bean counters with clipboards. He hated audits. Too many skeletons stuffed behind PowerPoint decks. Too many questions he couldn't answer without stammering. What I didn't expect was how fast it would blow back on him. 2 days in, the auditor flagged my project as exceeding efficiency projections by 17%. 17. That might not sound like fireworks to a casual observer, but in our world, shaving a single percent off heat loss was like discovering sliced bread and fire at the same time. And the icing, the thermal degradation index on my prototype was nearly half of what Brad's favored model clocked in at. Mine stayed stable under simulated G-force. His warped like a microwave burrito tray. Brad didn't say a word at the meeting. Just sat there, jaw clenched, flipping a Sharpie in his hand like it was a stress ball. That's when the contractor, this tall, quiet guy from some aerospace consultancy, leaned forward. He'd been mostly silent up until then, just watching. Would love to get a separate walkthrough of your process, he said. Not to Brad, to me, eyes steady, professional. Brad forced a smile that looked like it hurt his molars. Sure, we can all review it together, he said, already hijacking the next sentence. But the contractor shook his head, actually shook his head and said, I'd prefer to schedule it directly with her. Alone, if that's all right. Brad didn't even bother hiding his glare. He just muttered something about grabbing coffee and stomped out of the room. The solo briefing happened 2 days later in Conference C, a cramped, overheated glass box that always smelled like someone had microwaved old broccoli. I brought my renderings, my load curves, my handwritten notes. The contractor, still no last name, just a lanyard that said G. Harris, asked smart questions. Technical ones, the kind that told me he wasn't just there for show. By the time he left, he shook my hand and said, I think your work's going to matter more than you realize. Keep building. I should have walked straight to IT and locked down every directory the moment he said that. Instead, I returned to my desk to find Brad leaning against my chair like he was posing for a cringy LinkedIn profile pic. Heard the meeting went well, he said, too casual. What you two talk about? Thermals, I said. Stress dispersion under force loads. Data rack stuff. He fake laughed. You always get so technical, you should let me help. I'll simplify the deck for the client side, make it more digestible. I'm good, I replied, but he didn't back off. The next week, he hovered like a drunk mosquito, asking to take a look at your files or run some of your numbers through my model, just for comparison. Even suggested we merge our timelines into a joint presentation. I smiled, I nodded. I changed the subject. And that night, I started emailing myself full encrypted copies of my designs, version by version. Password-protected zips disguised as random invoice files. I logged my badge scans too, entry exit, every terminal I used. Not paranoid, just smart. Because Brad didn't act supportive unless he was sharpening the knife he planned to plant. Straw that cracked my comfort, I caught him at my terminal, said he was checking something for IT. The screen was still logged in when I walked in. His face turned to clay the moment he saw me. Just helping, he said. You're behind on backups, right? I stared him down. I do them every night. And that night, I backed everything up twice. One on the company server, one on my private encrypted drive. Then I opened my locked drawer, glanced at the folder marked in case of Brad, and laid my hand flat on the cover like a vow. It happened on a Thursday. Thursdays always felt cursed in that building. Someone's lunch exploded in the breakroom microwave, the elevators stalled between floors, the lights flickered like they were powered by haunted hamsters. But this Thursday, this one earned its spot in hell. I came back from lunch, half a turkey club, no mayo, eaten in my car to avoid Brad's team bonding over Chipotle nonsense, and my screen was black. Not sleep mode black, not oops, forgot to save black. I mean deep void, like someone had reached through the Ethernet cable and ripped the guts out of my project. I tapped the keyboard. Nothing. Moved the mouse. Nothing. Tried to reboot, got a blinking cursor and an error code I'd never seen. My stomach dropped straight to the carpet. I checked the server folder next. Empty. The renderings, the thermal tests, the layer-by-layer simulations, gone. All of it. Even the junk temp files I never deleted because I'm human and lazy and sometimes forget to clean up. Zeroed out like it had never existed. My hands were shaking when I opened my drawer. The real folder was still there, my sketches, the stress calculations, the backup USB drive tucked behind the binding like a secret tooth in a shark's grin. But before I could even zip it into my bag, I heard his voice behind me. Well, that's unfortunate. Brad, leaning on my cubicle wall like he was about to sell me a timeshare in hell. He was wearing that smug little half smile he reserved for moments when he thought he was being clever. It looked like it had been stapled to his face. You missed the deadline, he said, mock disappointed. Shame, really? All that work and now nothing to show for it. I didn't speak. Couldn't. My jaw locked so hard it felt like my molars were trying to crush each other. He waved a piece of paper like a magician revealing a rabbit. Your project's been archived as incomplete. I've informed HR. We'll need your badge, effective immediately. Incomplete, I said, the word burning like acid in my throat. It's not personal, he lied. We just can't have unreliable contributors in a high-stakes pipeline. You understand. I wanted to throw my coffee mug at his skull and frame the shards, but I didn't. I looked at the USB drive in my palm, curled my fingers around it, and slid it into the inner pocket of my bag like it was a relic worth dying for. You'll be escorted out shortly, he added like he was doing me a favor. Protocol, you know. HR arrived 5 minutes later, Karen from compliance, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. This isn't about your performance, she murmured. We're just following procedure. Bullshit. She took my badge. I kept the drive. Security was polite, too polite. They didn't cuff me or march me out like a perp, but the walk to the elevator still felt like a funeral. Coworkers peeked over their monitors and immediately looked away. No one said a word, except for Tim from QA, who gave me a look, not pity, something sharper. I'd find out later he knew exactly what Brad did, but that day, all he could do was nod, barely perceptible, as the elevator doors closed on what used to be my life. Once outside, I sat in my car, hand clenched so hard around the USB drive I thought I'd snap it in two. I didn't cry. Couldn't. My face was ice, my blood lava. I just stared at the building, those glass panels gleaming like nothing had happened, and thought, he thinks it's over. But I knew better because I had everything. Days after felt like gravity had doubled. I woke up without an alarm, stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me like it was mocking how still everything else had become. No morning status meetings, no thermals to test, no server simulations, just silence, broken only by the slow drip of my savings leaking through rent, groceries, and insurance premiums that suddenly felt obscene. I applied to 12 jobs the first day. Got 3 autoresponses. Ghosted me. Week 2, I sent 30 applications. Heard back from one, a polite rejection that didn't even bother to personalize the greeting. Dear applicant, like I was a placeholder in my own life. I emailed the company, not HR, that ship was incinerated, but a few former teammates. Nothing, not even Tim, who nodded at me like he knew. Maybe he did, maybe he was scared. I emailed the contractor. the quiet man from Conference C, Harris, or whatever his real name was. Subject line, follow up on rack briefing. I kept it vague, professional, just enough breadcrumbs to remind him who I was without setting off any corporate tripwires. Days passed, no reply. By week 3, I was rereading old design notes at 2 a.m., trying to convince myself I hadn't hallucinated the entire thing. Maybe I was too academic. Maybe I had moved too slow. Maybe Brad was right and I was just another cog too fragile for the machine. I stopped checking my inbox, stopped opening LinkedIn. The notifications were all junk anyway, random recruiters from industries I had no business being in. One even asked if I was interested in massage therapy entrepreneurship. I wasn't sure if that was a joke or a phishing attempt. Rock bottom wasn't loud. It was quiet, like drowning in pudding. You don't flail, you just give up. I started wondering if I should just let it go. Delete the backups, get a job in retail, say yes to the universe's suggestion that maybe I wasn't built for this fight. Then the call came. Tuesday, 11:47 a.m. I remember the time because I was halfway through microwaving a sad mug of leftover chili when my phone lit up with an unknown number. California area code. I almost let it ring out. Spam, probably. Another fake car warranty or someone asking if I'd thought about solar. But something itched at the back of my brain. I answered, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, measured, like it had practiced this moment in 100 simulations. "Hi. I hope this isn't a bad time. I'm reaching out regarding a certain server rack design, modular, aerospace compliant. It was presented internally under the alias Project Aurora." I didn't say anything. The microwave beeped in the background like a bomb counting down. "We'd like to discuss further," the voice continued. "You're not in any trouble. We believe you're the original designer. And we'd like to confirm some details off the record for now, if that's all right." "Who are you?" I asked, finally finding my voice. "A contractor for a government entity," he said carefully. "We're not authorized to give specifics yet, but I think you'll find this worth your time." He paused. "Can fly you to Pasadena. NDA provided, expenses covered. You'd be debriefed in person and compensated." I stared at the USB drive on my desk, still in the same zip bag I'd used the day they walked me out. He waited, not pushy, just patient. "I'll need a day," I said. "You've got 2, he replied, "but I'd recommend packing tonight." I landed at Bob Hope Airport under a name badge that wasn't mine and an NDA thick enough to choke a horse. A guy named Marcus met me at the gate, mid-40s, gray buzzcut, mirrored sunglasses like he moonlighted as a bouncer at Area 51. Didn't say much, just handed me a visitor lanyard and pointed to a black Suburban that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. We drove past rows of beige buildings that looked like government facilities always do, like someone took ambition and beat it to death with budget cuts. But once we turned past the 3rd checkpoint, things changed. The air got quieter, crisper. My badge beeped through 3 layers of security before I was allowed to step into what they called Annex B, a research facility nestled behind an old aerospace manufacturing lot near Pasadena. Inside, it smelled like ozone and sterilized dreams. Cold tile, buzzing fluorescent lights, and whiteboards littered with formulas I hadn't seen since grad school. A woman named Lisa handed me a water bottle and said, "We need to talk about your rack." I laughed, just a reflex. She didn't, she meant business. They led me into a conference room where 2 engineers were already flipping through my sketches, photocopies of the ones I'd stuffed in the backup folder, annotations still intact. One of them looked up, tapped the corner. "You wrote this equation by hand?" "Yes." "And this layout, module CTIC-S snap couplings, this was yours too." "All of it?" Lisa looked over at the guy in the corner who hadn't said a word. He nodded. She handed me a folder and said, "We want you to rebuild it, from scratch, here. We'll cover living expenses and put you on a 6-week civilian contract." I blinked. Based on my notes, I asked, "That's it? You're the only one who's actually run the original simulation. We want the real thing, not a Xerox, not a guess." My hands were shaking. I tried to steady them around the folder. It wasn't the money, it was the fact that for the first time in months, someone was looking at me like I was the authority, like I mattered. And then came the kicker. Marcus finally spoke. 2 weeks ago, we received a similar design from a company that claims internal ownership. Structurally close. Language was different. But the frame, the thermal routing, even the coupling schema, nearly identical. He tapped a folder labeled flagged, redacted submission, Delta tier. We ran a comparison check. Their materials failed under G-force simulation. Design tolerances were misaligned by 11%, but what really got our attention? He flipped to a page and slid it across. It was a screenshot from their file. Bottom right corner, my internal test header, my exact file name, time-stamped. Even the typo I'd made in the word chassis was still there, chassis. They stole it. I said, breath catching in my throat. They tried, Marcus corrected, but they didn't understand what they were copying. Lisa leaned forward, her tone softer now. "We didn't reach out because we felt sorry for you. We reached out because we want it done right, and you're the only person who knows how to do that." Something in me snapped back into place right then, not all the way, but enough. I opened the folder, took a deep breath, and started sketching. The lab they gave me was about the size of my old apartment, except this one had airflow sensors, a dedicated test chamber, and a 3D printer that made my former workplace's gear look like a Fisher-Price hobby kit. I didn't ask questions about the budget. I just got to work. 12-hour shifts turned into 16. I lived in the same hoodie, rotated through a drawer of basic tees they gave me when I forgot to pack more than 2 changes of clothes. No meetings, no corporate politics, no Brad breathing down my neck asking if I'd made it more blue yet. Just me, the hum of machines, and the slow resurrection of something I thought I'd lost. I rebuilt the frame first. Smaller, lighter. Adjusted the load dispersion angle by 3 degrees and shaved 14% off the total stress curve. Then the thermal pathway, rerouted through a staggered hex pattern I'd only sketched once on a napkin in a diner during my 3rd week of unemployment. That napkin? Still in my backup folder. Every schematic was saved in triplicate. Local drive, encrypted cloud, and a physical printout in a fireproof envelope I stored under the mini-fridge in the lab's corner. I wasn't leaving anything to chance this time. If someone tried to delete this one, they'd have to erase 3 continents. By week 4, the prototype was standing on its own. Polished steel, seamless joints, perfect modularity. I ran test after test, thermal shock, vibration, simulated launch conditions. It held, it thrived. The original would have been proud, but this version didn't just meet specs, it rewrote them. A mid-level NASA rep named Evan dropped by unannounced near the end of my 5th week. He didn't shake hands, just circled the prototype, tapped a tablet, nodded to himself. "Is this yours?" he asked. "Yes, no help, just me." He looked back at the prototype, then said, "We'll recommend this for full deployment." That sentence hit harder than any paycheck I'd ever earned. I didn't cry, not in front of him. But when the door clicked shut behind him, I sat on the floor, leaned against the test rig, and let myself breathe for the first time in months. Later that night, I got an encrypted message through the contractor's internal system. Subject line, heads up. Inside was just one sentence. FYI, Brad's firm is now under formal investigation by Office of Inspector General. NDA still applies. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. No exclamation marks, no celebration, just confirmation. The wheels were turning, quietly, relentlessly. And somewhere across the country, Brad was finally learning what it felt like to be replaced by something better. The first sign that the dominoes were falling didn't come through some flashy headline or whistleblower exposé. It came through LinkedIn of all places. I was eating a gas station granola bar at my workstation, halfway through another voltage stability test, when the notification pinged across my screen. Message from Tim H., QA specialist, the same Tim who'd given me that look when I was escorted out like a criminal. The same Tim who knew exactly how Brad operated but had kept his head down to survive. His message was just 4 words, "You heard about Brad, right?" I stared at it, unsure if I should even respond. My NDA didn't technically cover casual gossip, but I'd been walking a tightrope for weeks and wasn't about to trip over a LinkedIn chat. Another message followed. Seconds later, don't reply. Just Google Sierra plus OIG probe and congrats, you earned this. I didn't even finish the granola bar. Sierra Brad's firm, was being investigated for IP theft, data tampering, and something far worse, procurement fraud involving federal contracts. Apparently, after submitting the knockoff version of my design, someone inside had gotten spooked and leaked inconsistencies to a subcontracting audit team. Knockoff had failed every major test. Worse, it carried metadata from internal test servers that should have been inaccessible to Brad's people. Someone had faked access logs, backdated file edits, and recompiled old versions under new timestamps. The government noticed. Quietly at first, Sierra pipeline froze. Contracts put on hold. Requests for documentation piled up. Clients walked. Then Brad's name vanished from their leadership page overnight. His nephew, a walking HR complaint with a badge, was let go under the vague heading of performance mismatch. I didn't gloat. I didn't text anyone, but I read every single line of that article 3 times. I kept working. Because now the work wasn't just mine, it was proof. Proof I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't just some overly meticulous academic who got in the way of real movers and shakers. I was the movement. I was the damn earthquake. The project hit its final milestone in week 6. The prototype passed NASA Environmental Qualification Battery with near-zero drift. My supervisor, Lisa, stood over my shoulder, scanning the results. "You just raised the bar for next year's tech forecast," she said. I tried to smile, but it came out more like a twitch. I hadn't figured out how to relax yet. That night, while I was logging one last batch of notes into the triple encrypted server, calendar invites slid into my inbox. Private design signing NASA HQ Langley campus. Attendance requested. NDA extension will apply. Travel itinerary to follow. The subject line didn't say it, but I knew what it was. They were going to put my name on it. And this time, no one could delete it. Langley looked nothing like I imagined. It wasn't all rockets and marble halls. It was concrete, quiet, clinical. The kind of place where history hums beneath the drywall, and the most important conversations happen in rooms without windows. They gave me a badge with my real name this time. No alias. No pseudonym. Just me. The signing room wasn't grand. Just a small, clean space with a table that had probably seen 1,000 breakthroughs, 100 broken egos, and maybe 3 victories that actually mattered. I sat at one end, flanked by Lisa on my left and a patent attorney on my right, who looked like she hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration. Across from me sat a representative from the Office of Technology Transfer. He tapped the stack of papers like they might sprout legs and walk off. "We've finalized the design patent paperwork," he said. "You'll be listed as sole inventor and sole designer. This will carry a NASA endorsement, which means you'll be cited in every deployment document from here forward." I held the pen, but my hand didn't move at first. I thought of that empty server folder, that hallway walk of shame with HR, Brad's smug face as he told me I had nothing to show, the way his voice curled around the word incomplete like it was a verdict. And now here I was, signing the blueprint that would power the next generation of high-efficiency aerospace computing. I wrote my name in block letters, twice. Then Lisa slid another document across the table. "We're offering you 2 options," she said. "Full-time staff engineer position, or you retain full IP licensing and take royalties per use. Freedom versus permanence." I didn't even hesitate. Royalties and freedom. She smiled, the first real one I'd seen since Pasadena. The pen had barely left the paper when my phone buzzed. No name. Just a headline that floated across my lock screen like a ghost. "Breaking. Sierra is blacklisted from federal contracts for 10 years. Violations include IP theft, data falsification, and procurement fraud." I exhaled. Long, slow, like my lungs were finally catching up with my spine. Brad wasn't just suspended now, he was radioactive. Every company in the contractor network would treat him like anthrax in a suit. His name wouldn't open doors anymore. It would close them, seal them shut, and still, I couldn't help but feel a strange emptiness under the victory. Like I'd walked away from the edge of a cliff I hadn't even realized I was hanging off of. That close. One bad day, one lost sketch, one erased file, and I'd have vanished while his firm cashed the check. But now I'd made it out. Not just intact, immortalized. I stood from the table. The patent attorney nodded. The representative extended a hand. Lisa handed me the first production prototype tag, emblazoned with my name, model number, and a QR code that linked to the official NASA registry. And somewhere in Virginia, probably watching the news scroll across a muted flat screen in some soul-sucked corporate lobby, Brad was realizing what I'd always known. You can delete a file, but you can't erase the one who built it. The email came from a magazine I'd barely heard of, Next Wave Systems Weekly. Circulation, niche, audience, the kind of engineers who collect soldering irons and still argue over cable management on Reddit. They wanted to do a short piece on emerging civilian tech in government aerospace contracts. Apparently someone at NASA had mentioned my name in passing, and now I was an exciting development in modular rack design, which is the nerdiest way I've ever been called a badass. At first, I almost didn't answer. I didn't need the attention. I had my licensing deal, my royalties were starting to trickle in, and I was already buried in 3 new design proposals. But something about it nagged at me, not for ego, for closure, so I said yes. The journalist was young, probably fresh out of grad school. He had nervous energy and wore a tie like it was his first real interview. We met over video call. He was polite, efficient, and clearly stunned that someone who looked like me had pulled off something most defense contractors spent a decade chasing. He asked about airflow dynamics, chassis compression tolerances, data latency under vibration stress. I gave him real answers, nothing classified, nothing too flashy, just enough to show him I earned every millimeter of that patent. Then, near the end, he leaned back and asked casually, "So, how'd this all begin?" I could have given him the long version. The empty folder, the smug smile. HR's polite little assassination, the flight to Pasadena, the sleepless nights, the USB drive in my purse, the silent countdown to career oblivion. But I didn't, I smiled. "My manager deleted my rack design," I said, voice even, "so I built a better one for someone who believed in it." He blinked, then laughed. Wow, that's perfect." A week later, the piece went live. Page 6. Titled, "Built to Endure, How One Engineer Quietly Reinvented Aerospace Hardware." The quote got bolded, framed in a yellow box like it was poetry. No one screamed. No one gloated. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes or viral takedowns. Just one woman, one stolen file, and one unshakable truth. Funny thing about deletion, it doesn't work when you're backed up. What hit me most in this story wasn't just the revenge, it was how quiet it all was. No yelling, no courtroom theatrics, just pure strategy. It's a reminder that when you know your worth and keep your receipts, silence can be the loudest victory. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the Coffee Pot strikes again.